Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Christina Fox, the CEO of Tech Alliance. As the Regional Innovation Center for Southwestern Ontario, Tech Alliance empowers world-class ventures and fuels growth in Canada's innovation economy. We champion and coach entrepreneurs, amplify and impact businesses, and contribute to a bold technology community across Southwestern Ontario. If you'd like to engage with our venture growth team, read stories about innovation that are shaping our community with world-changing ventures, or join any other upcoming experiences, I invite you to subscribe to our newsletter using the link in the chat. We are the place for dreamers, innovators, and world-changing ideas. And in pursuit of creating spaces where innovation thrives, we must be bold and lift others as we rise. And we strive to do that in all that we do at Tech Alliance. To put it simply, we support entrepreneurs and ventures at every step of the entrepreneurial journey. So before we get started on today's masterclass, I've got a few housekeeping points. All participant mics are muted, so relax and enjoy yourself. Today's masterclass will be recorded and available for replay on our YouTube channel. And of course, I encourage you to add any questions for Janet in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Add any comments in our active chat feature. Janet's really open to taking questions as we go, so I'll keep an eye on those questions and I'll jump in and ask on your behalf. In the ever-evolving innovation technology, company culture has never been more important. The culture of a workplace is a major consideration for both job seekers and employees alike, helping companies recruit and retain top talent. Considering, planning for, and adapting workplace practices is great for both the bottom line and for those people who make it happen all day, every day. Today, we have the privilege to explore how to craft and cultivate work environments that put people first, creating safe, inclusive, progressive spaces where individuals and businesses can thrive. I'm so thrilled to introduce my coach and longtime friend, Janet Frood. When Janet entered my professional world, honestly, I can tell you that I was deeply changed forever. Janet is a phenomenal executive coach with such a wide breadth of influencing and experience that the learning truly never ends. And with very great intention, I knew we'd want to work with Janet with our team at Tech Alliance, and she did. So we're on the other side of that journey, and the journey continues. The experience and the results have been transformative, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful. So let me tell you a little bit about Janet. Janet is the founder and CEO of Horizon Leadership Institute, is a certified executive leadership and team coach. She is caring and provocative ally for leaders and organizations as they boldly transform. She serves clients in the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors. With a degree in social behavior and international coaching certificates, Janet is uniquely qualified to help individuals and teams and organizations confront the status quo, find the opportunity that changes the lives within, and cultivate conscious cultures. Some of you may have had the pleasure of working with Janet in some capacity, and for those of you who have not, I tell you that she is simply incredible, salt of the earth, and a strong partner for creating new realities that support a prosperous future state. I say that with authenticity and a deep connection, and I'm really so pleased to be spending this time with her. At Tech Alliance, we do have a common belief that between our board and our staff, our entrepreneurs and residents and our growth coaches, that the entire technology community is in pursuit of creating spaces where innovation thrives. And we're focused on amplifying leaders in their fields and providing opportunities like today's masterclass to do just that. So we're thrilled to have Janet here with us now to share her own knowledge and expertise. And with that, Janet, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Christina, and I'm really excited to be here. Today's topic is actually one of my most favorite topics, and so I'm really looking forward to presenting. So I want to start off today by talking about the notion that culture is everyone's business. As I walk through the presentation today, I'm going to address a number of issues in terms of how to create conscious culture, but also how to create it so that it is held deeply within the organization. Oftentimes, I feel that, the expectation or thought is, well, culture is the role and the work of HR, or it's leaders' job to create culture. But what I've discovered in doing work with organizations and teams over many years is that culture only flourishes when people are individually invested in it, when it's created with a very conscious and intentional design, and when everybody sees it as a responsibility. So I'm going to walk through a number of different elements in terms of how I tend to approach culture work with organizations, some of the frameworks, some of the different structures that I tend to use, and bring it to you as for your consideration. So let's talk about organizational culture. And it was interesting recently working with the team. One of the leaders said, well, what is culture anyway? And it made me realize that I often work on the assumption that people know what culture is. So I wanted to frame, when we're talking about culture, these are some of the key points that I think are important. So culture is an intentional articulation of core values. The values are the container in which people understand how they're expected to behave and how they engage with each other. Culture is an opportunity to create shared meaning, and it really is a way of distinguishing your organization as unique and distinct from other organizations. And culture is also an opportunity to really define how people make decisions or navigate really difficult times. We are still living in the time of pandemic. And I think it's been really interesting to see how different organizations, different cultures have responded. And so we'll talk about, what are some of the attributes that help people through the lens of their culture be able to adapt and navigate challenges, as well as, being at the very best. It's how do you sit in the pocket of challenge and disruption. So when culture's well defined, that's easier to do. So when do you work on culture? And I think it's really important to say that culture work needs to be tended to all the time. If we assume that we have a good culture, you may see it slip over time. So culture does need persistent attention. Culture work is a long game. It can't be something that you just say, oh, there's our culture initiative, boom, done, move on. It doesn't work that way. So there are certain points in time where you do need to amplify the focus on culture. And I've identified a few of them. And again, your own reality. When is culture work necessary? But what I've noticed is that there are times to do a pause, possibly a reset or reboot your culture. And they include if your organization is going through a shift in its development stage. So by that, I mean, it could be that you've been in a startup mode and you've had a certain way of operating and you're starting to grow. And as you grow and evolve your company, you have more people coming in, taking responsibility. That's a time where you may need to go from just an unintentional, just a way we do things around here mindset to creating something that's more conscious so other people can buy into it and contribute to it. So it may mean that you need to define your culture more specifically. It could be because of a merger or an acquisition. In that case, you have 2 or 3 or more organizations that are coming together and they're bringing with them their individual cultures, their values, their practices, their beliefs. And you need to consciously create an integrated culture. And I'll tell a couple of stories about that as we go on. Fast growth organizations, those are ones where as you grow quickly, it could be the magnitude of the work, the scale, the scope, or it could be that you're hiring a ton of new people. To assume that in that fast growth, your culture will be stable or that it will be the same can be a misstep. You need to really anchor that growth with intentional culture work. Make sure that you're onboarding and welcoming people into the culture with intention and that they understand. Sometimes cultures change when a founder leaves or retires. Oftentimes cultures, actually the birthplace of an organizational culture is from the founder, the person who started the business, a core operating team that really were in the early stage of development. When those people leave, there's an element that can leave with them. And so it's important to acknowledge, who are we? We're not just built around a person, we're built around a belief system. And how will we perpetuate that as we go forward? Another time that, and I think it's often when I tend to get called in to do work with organizations, it's sometimes because there's been a drop in engagement. They're starting to realize that people are not as engaged, the culture may be suffering, and there's some alignment work to do. So that's another indicator that you might want to focus on your culture. As I said, culture is a long game. It takes a long time to consciously design and cultivate a culture where people can flourish. And it can sometimes take a long time for the culture to erode. There might be little bits of erosion that happen over time, but then eventually it becomes a big, significant issue. So it is something to think about who or how to hold it over a very long and persistent time. I want to show a video for you, and this is from Patrick Lencioni, and this is introducing a concept called around organizational health and smart and healthy elements. So I'm going to play this for you, and then we'll process it a bit.
Any organization that wants to maximize its potential, whether we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar corporation, or a department within that corporation, or a church, or a school, or a small entrepreneurial venture, any organization that wants to truly become its best has to be good at two basic things. First, it has to be smart. Now, when I say smart, what I'm talking about is things like technology and strategy, finance, marketing, and all the other decision sciences that you learn about in business school or that you read about in the Wall Street Journal. These things are critical. I used to be a management consultant, and this is what we focused on, and this is really important, and it's interesting, and nobody should ever tell you that an organization doesn't need to have these things. But it's only half the equation, and it gets about 95% of the attention for most leaders. You see, the other half of the equation, an organization also has to be healthy. What a healthy organization looks like is it has the following characteristics. It has minimal politics, very low politics among people, minimal confusion among employees as well, high levels of morale and productivity, and not just in an esoteric or touchy-feely sense. People are psyched to come to work and they get a lot done when they're there. And then very low turnover among good people. Good employees just never leave. Now, almost every executive that I show this to says to me, Pat, I have to make my organization healthier. This is keeping me up at night. I know it drives me crazy. It must be killing us. We've got to do that. But then after a very short period of time, they gravitate back to this side of the equation, to the smart side, because that's where they're comfortable. They're like that old episode of I Love Lucy where Ricky comes home from work and he finds Lucy crawling around the living room on her hands and knees. And he says, "What are you doing?" And she says, "Well, I'm looking for my earrings." So he asks her, "So you lost your earrings out here in the living room?" And she says, No, I lost them in the bedroom, but the light out here is much better." And that's how so many leaders are. They're more comfortable where the light is better, on the smart side of the equation. But the thing is, this is not where the greatest opportunity for competitive advantage, improvement, and transformation lies. That's over here on the healthy side. You see, most organizations these days are pretty darn smart, because with the ubiquity of information and with the internet, almost every company is smart enough to succeed. In fact, I never work with organizations that I think they're just too dumb to make this work. The real issue in most organizations today is, are we healthy enough to tap into the intelligence that we have? You see, the health of an organization is the multiplier of its intelligence. And so my encouragement to leaders is make your organization healthy, because this is going to make you different from your competition, and it's going to allow you ultimately to become smarter too.
So I just want to underscore, this is from a book that Patrick Lencioni has written called The Advantage, and it covers a lot of different elements around organizational health. I love this concept, and I love that he's pointing us to what is the focus of leadership. And as he said, the smart side of the business tends to get 95% of the leader's attention, leadership attention. But the healthy part of the business, the way he talked about it was, it's the multiplier effect. That when we really focus on creating conditions for a healthy, sustainable, vibrant culture where people feel well engaged, well supported, where people can be as productive as possible, when we focus on creating those conditions, and to me, that's culture work, it is a multiplier effect to assure that we do the smart side of the business well. And this is something that I find for a lot of leadership teams and organizations, when you ask questions like, how much of your meeting do you spend when you gather as a leadership team on the healthy side of the business? Most will say, not very much. The healthy side tends to come up when there's problems. It's a reaction to, instead of a proactive, very consistent and persistent attention and focus on these things. So we wanted to do a poll with you right now related to the healthy elements. And Allison, you're going to help me with the poll, right? And what this is asking you, the poll is going to ask you to identify indicators of unhealthy culture elements. So right now you might, notice in your organization, is there a high degree of politics? Is there a high level of confusion? Is there low morale in your organization, or low productivity, or high turnover? You're losing good people. You can answer as many of these as you want, but let's just get a little bit of a view and picture to see.
And Janet, as we're waiting for that poll to be conducted, a really good question came in. And I think it's a really terrific opportunity when we're talking about healthy organizations and proactively developing our teams, because culture is that long game. A question came in about, what are your recommendations for building an organizational culture? And I'm assuming it's related to proactivity that supports diverse personal cultures. In other words, how do we create space and intention in work culture for diversity? So that's just a question. If that flows into the dialogue that you're going to be speaking about with healthy cultures, that might be a great way to address the question. Or if that weaves in content coming up, then feel free to hang back.
Okay. Yep, that's great. I'll process the poll first, and then I'll address this, and we may circle back to it as well. So thank you. It's a great question and a very timely one, actually. So, all right. It looks like our voting may be done at this point. So if we can share the results, which I can do. Here we go. Yeah. So again, you'll see different indicators here, in terms of just the group that happened to be here and people that chose to respond. High confusion is a really interesting one. That was the most dominant one. High confusion is often the result of people not having clear roles, people not having clear direction towards goals. Oftentimes confusion may be around, what does success look like? It could be, some lack of clarity. And so I think that, what can we do to stabilize that is a very important piece. When people are clear in what they need to do and how they will contribute to the overall culture and success of the organization, their sense of accomplishment, productivity, their sense of purpose, all of those things will go up. And so that actually, when there's clarity, increased clarity, then you will actually see productivity go up, morale will go up, all of those things. So I always remind people, it's like, don't look at these as singular elements. They really actually have impact on each other. One thing that I want to speak to around turnover, if we see turnover, and he was very, very precise. He said you have, ideally, a healthy culture has low turnover of good people. Having people stay who are not contributing or producing, who may be working counter to the culture, is not actually something that you want to tolerate. If you have people that are, staying, but they're actually detracting from the culture and that's being tolerated, that could actually be something that could have a negative impact on the culture. But if you have high turnover of really great people, that usually is an indication that there is something going on that needs to be addressed. So that is something that's really important to think about. Morale, and could be a clue to engagement. And so if you do engagement surveys, looking at some of these elements can be very important. And then the one thing that you need to start looking at is, well, what are the ways that we can actually focus on this? And oftentimes it will be around developing leaders and managers so they have some consistent practices to support conditions for healthy culture. So it's one thing to name what the culture is and articulate it and design it. I think the other thing that I notice is that sometimes people don't equip their leaders with the ability to support and sustain the culture that they want to have. So I'm hoping that you can just, even one takeaway even from this conversation is, are you focusing on the health of your organization? Is your leadership team taking responsibility to hold this as a priority? That it is something that is spoken about on a regular basis. If it is not, and if you're not scanning and taking a pulse check of what the culture is like, you may be missing an opportunity to really address things when they are not in disaster stage, but rather when they can be worked on proactively. With regard to the notion of the diverse personal cultures, I think that this is a really interesting thing. So the quick place that my mind went was, how do we create inclusive cultures and communities? People want to belong. It is the human desire to feel a sense of connection and belonging. And so how can you as an organization create conditions for people to feel a sense of belonging? When we have increasingly diverse workforces, and if we want to be inclusive, one thing that I have witnessed organizations do is that they have culture champions. So instead of it just being organizational, HR, it takes the responsibility for some of the elements around culture. For organizations that really want to have a very vibrant cultures, but create communities of belonging, they tend to have culture champion groups. And they have a mandate where they create programs and opportunities for people to gather. Dependent on the size of an organization, some will have, special tables and groups where people who are LGBTQ can come and talk and share and learn from each other, do cross-mentoring support. There could be, there's just so many examples, but that's sort of the idea that I would suggest is engage the people in your organization to talk about how do we create an inclusive culture and what that could look like through programming, and get them involved in it. Let them lead some of those initiatives. So that's a suggestion on that question. I want to move forward and start to introduce something from this work, which is called Tribal Leadership, and it's based on Dave Logan, John King, and Haley Fisher-Wright's research. If you don't have the bandwidth to read a whole book, there is a TED Talk by Dave Logan, which will give you the highlights. But what they have identified is that workplaces are relationship systems. And so they talk about the notion of tribes. And in their definition of tribes, what they talk about is these are relationship systems that tend to be between 20 to 150 people. If you go to a group, like say your workplace might have maybe 300 people, you might have 1,000 people, you will have multiple tribal connections or groupings within your organization. But some organizations, if they're smaller, once you're in that zone of 20 to 150, it really is a group of people that they know each other well. There's a strong sense of common culture, and the culture is what connects them to each other. So I'll walk you through a few of these different elements, because in their research, they identified that there are 5 stages of culture. And in their research, and what they identified a number of elements. And so there's some common themes. How do these groups collaborate? How do they communicate? And sort of what's the mood or tone and the approach to the work? And So I'll walk you through, and again, the TED Talk covers this, but it just, kind of a quick orientation. Stage 1 culture it's very disconnected. So if you look at the far right, the diagram, if the blue dot is me, in that culture, I feel very alienated, very outside. There's not a lot of connection. So people may be clustered, but they're not, I would feel more like an outsider. I'm not really part of the group. The common conversation, or you would hear people say, is life sucks, like all life sucks. And only 2% of organizations fall into this category. And quite frankly, it's more like a gang or prison mentality or mindset. And so it's not very soul-filling, it's really despairing. People, you don't really want to see people or see an organization functioning there. In fact, if it's a stage 1 culture, odds are the organization is going to blow up. It won't be sustainable. Stage 2 culture is where people are, I might be part of the group, but I'm not really connected. It's a whole bunch of people that are clustering together, but they may not be particularly satisfied. There might be a lot of complaining, and people talking about how their life sucks. There's no joy in their work. They may feel a little bit like a victim. And that can create a whole culture of like people engage with each other, but it's through misery. It's not very productive, and people are not, they're just doing their own thing. So stage 2 culture is about 25% of our organizations are at a stage 2. Stage 3 cultures is the most common. And this is a little bit more where the focus is like, I do my own thing. I'm a lone wolf. I'm competing to win. I'm thinking more about my performance. You'll see in this case that it's more of a hub and spoke model. So the leader is at the center, and then all the different people work and they communicate solely with the leader. So they get their assignments, they do their work, they get individual rewards. And the conversation is like, I'm great. And it also implies, and you're not. So it is very much a compete to win. This is where the majority of organizations tend to work from. And it's about, I think it's 45% of organizations tend to be at this level of the stage 3 culture. We do tend to, we recognize and we reward individual contributions through performance feedback. And so, again, it is something about, success is based on what have you done and what are you doing for the organization. The research, though, has identified that there's limitation to how great an organization can be, how good the results can be when you've got a whole bunch of people doing their own thing. So in the research for tribal leadership, it was identified that if you can cultivate and move a culture to a stage 4 way of functioning and get to a actually sustainable stage 4 culture, you will have extraordinary success. And in this case, you'll see that it's a networked way of working. So while there may be leaders, there's a whole lot of these triadic relationships, people working together to create results and to collaborate. And the mindset is we work in partnership, we are great. It's, the collective effort is more effective than it is to do a whole lot of stuff going it alone. And so this is something where there's a lot of pride based on the collective efforts of the group. It's not a lot of recognition of the individual. It's a lot more around the team, what teams contribute, how teams create success together. You'll see then there's another stage of culture, which is called level 5. And this is one which is called, life is great. And this is a very networked approach. It's very collaborative. And it is something that is almost magical. Stage 5 cultures are not sustainable. They often emerge around initiatives that are bigger than any one company. They tend to come together when there is extreme innovation required. I suspect that actually in some of the vaccine development that we've witnessed through the pandemic, that there has been collaboration where people would normally be competitors. They've come together for the higher good of creating vaccines for the world. And so these are ones where very relationship focused, you reach out and it's all about what can we do to make life great. So there's a higher purpose call. But this is not a sustainable way of working. It tends to be around an initiative or a need in the world, and then it might dissolve. So in the work that we do with organizations, we really work with them on how can you move your organizational culture to a stage 4 culture. And it takes practice and it takes a lot of effort. You'll see that there's some of the attributes of stage 4 culture, and these are some practices. So it is starting to really develop the mindset of we versus me. We are great. And so what that means from a culture perspective is you need to build in incentives and ways of actually motivating people to take a collective approach. Are there team rewards, team goals instead of just individual goals? And that needs to be celebrated. And it's not just amongst individual teams, it's across the organization that people acknowledge and celebrate the collective effort that people are doing. The one practice, and this is such a powerful practice, but the notion of triading. A triadic approach is if I'm trying to do something and I'm working, say I was working with Christina, she and I were trying to work on something. And, but in the conversation, if we keep on referencing, it's like, oh, wait, we need Sean to be part of this. And, can you go talk to him? And it's like, yeah, I'll go talk to him, then I'll come back to talk to you. A triadic approach is like, no, just ask Sean to be in the conversation with us. So you actively create triads. Who else needs to be in the conversation? And you engage people. So you move away from that dyadic way of working. You get the right people in the conversation at the right time. The more that happens, it breeds the mindset of we are great instead of I will make it happen. How can we engage with each other? Another practice that is common in stage 4 is this notion of a noble purpose. What is the higher noble purpose? The greater good that we are trying to define. So again, that's work. You need to define that so that it's the North Star that people will rally around. It needs to be values informed. Values is the glue that connects and creates a common culture. And I will be talking about that in more detail in just a bit. And then the notion of compelling strategy. It's strategy that inspires people. They see themselves in it. So these are all practices that can be developed to support stage 4 culture. So I am curious, and this is another poll, based on what you've heard, if you had to identify not where you hope your culture is, but where your culture is today, and being really honest. Allison, if you could do the next poll for us, just to reveal where people think their culture might be.
Of course, I'm a huge fan, Janet, of the tribal leadership and the 5 stages of culture, and having that process with you as a team. We, on our Slack channel right now, we're all sort of buzzing and popping with the discussion about 1, 2, 3, and 4 and 5. And I just put in acknowledging and celebrating our own team, that we have a number of members of our team that are perpetually at stage 4. And then they do that positive drift into stage 5. And having this conversation with you today and having members of our team on, it feels reminiscent of our early stages when we were learning about the attributes and when we were desiring stage 4 culture. So
yeah, Yeah, that's awesome.
Real time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that's great. Yeah. And it's cool today. I mean, thank goodness. I'm glad that nobody here today is saying that they're in stage one. Honestly, you don't want to be there. It would be brutal. When I was in university, I did a lot of work in prisons. I would go in and visit, and I was like, whoa, like this is not a place that you want to be, whether you're a prisoner or an inmate or whether you're a guard. The toxicity, the despair was horrible. But, again, we see here today, we have a number that are stage 4. We are great. I just want to reinforce for you, to get there is phenomenal. To stay there requires so much work, so much discipline, so much intention. And so it is something that if you're there, keep doing the important work that you are wanting to do or needing to do. For stage 3 cultures, what I will share, this is the biggest band. You will see early stage 3, middle stage 3, and latter stage 3. The one thing that I do want to say is that if you want to move up levels of culture, you're going to have to move through sort of, even if you're later or early stage 3, you're going to have to kind of get to the midpoint, then the higher end, before you can go up to a stage 4. One of the things that this research also says is that you can't take a stage 2 culture and just, propel it right up to stage 4. You have to work through the different stages. And so there's tons of tips and tools in terms of how to develop a culture. And then how you will it's both developing the culture, but then it's the practices of management and leadership again. So you're going to hear, as we talk today, the role of leaders is very integral to creating strong, sustainable culture. But I think it's also something where again, we need to think about the programs. What programs do you have in place, and how will you move through the stages over time? Okay, so I'm going to again keep moving us forward. So one of the things that is inherent is that to have a really vibrant culture, I always think about the container that holds culture, our values. And so I want to walk through a little bit of the values work. And again, this is from Patrick Lencioni's work. I love him because he's very precise and clear in actually giving good articulation to things. So there's 4 different types of values that he has identified, and I just want to give a bit of an overview. So core values, these are the ones that actually live inherently in your organization. These are ones, they are so core to the identity of your organization, and they don't tend to change very much over time. One of the things I've noticed is oftentimes if you still have a founder that's part of your organization, that the core values often are a reflection of the person who started the company and who may still be influencing the culture. And I'll give you an example. We work with one organization and it's a B Corp, and so they have a high social purpose. But when we did some work with them, we kept on hearing language that they used, which is like, we're all in. We're all in. It was like, what is this? But when we heard the founder and CEO talk, it's words that he uses. So instead of saying we're committed, he talked about, how much he took pride in seeing people be all in. They would roll up their sleeves. And in the early days of startup, they would, everybody would just like jump and do whatever needed to be done. So as we continue to do some work to really help them identify their culture, because they were one of those ones that was going through that startup into a maturing, their stage of development was changing. They needed to clarify the culture instead of having it implied. And all in became one of their core values. And it has meaning for them. Other companies would go, I don't know what that means. That doesn't resonate for us. But in their world, they knew what it meant. You'll also see that Lencioni has identified that, core values are ones that organizations and leaders and team members are willing to be punished for living those values. What that means is they will make hard decisions. So let's say you have a core value and a strong belief in something, and you have a client that says, well, we don't want to do it that way. We need to do this and this and this. When core values are clear and deep, an organization would have the courage to say, I'm sorry, that is not that does not align with our values. We will not do business that way. You might lose a contract, but it means you're staying in your integrity. So the core values are ones, they are this guidance system. They keep you true. They keep you moving forward. And you just can't make them up. It's like they live in the history, the story, the fabric of your organization. So these are ones that you really, and in Lencioni's work, he says, core values is what you want to go for. The other type of values, there's aspirational values. So these are ones where it's like you want to have them. It's like, ooh, I wish we could have, like, we should be more innovative, or we want to be more courageous. Or it's like, we need to be trusted. We want to be a trusted organization. And so aspirational values, they are often ones that don't live in the organization. And you're trying to get there, but they don't have authentic roots. And I have worked with organizations where they have actually, in naming their values, they have tilted to aspirational values. And what happens is they can't live up to them. It's inconsistent. People don't really believe them. It's not true to who they are. And so they're faking it in a way. And I've noticed sometimes that it's like, then people get disappointed. The values don't have a chance of being fulfilled here. And so it's really interesting. It's just not the inherent beliefs. So it's just be cautious when you're doing your culture work. If you're trying to review or renew your values, make sure that you're not tipping into aspirational values. And I do notice that sometimes if cultures aren't working, people are like, well, we should have this value and then our culture will be better. And it actually doesn't really work that way. Another one is called accidental values. And this is something that happens where it's sort of, they're unintentional. You're not really paying attention, but all of a sudden you start to notice, it's like, wow, like we have employees that all come from like the same type of educational background, or they all tend to be middle class, or they all tend to, like, we're hiring, a certain age. People kind of look the same. So these are unintentional values. And I've seen this a couple of times. You kind of walk in and it's like, wow, like everybody here kind of dresses the same. Or, it's sort of like people have, it just, you notice it. Some companies, they have this where there's a type of person or a type of, way of doing things. And these are ones to just pay attention to, because they may kind of creep in, and it's like, is this our intention? Are these the values that are true to who we are? Or are they actually things that are maybe getting in the way of being in our integrity and who we want to be? So just notice them if these are starting to creep into your culture. The other one he calls them permission to play. And he basically says, these are the ones that are like, they're minimum behavioral standards, stuff like honesty, integrity, respect. It's sort of like, you would hope that those are the values that just exist, that's part of a professional environment. If you need to name these as actual values, it may mean that there's a problem. You're trying to name the value, but it's sort of like, it really should be more implied, or it's like, this is who we are. So again, and you'll see, a lot of organizations, when you look at their values, you may see a lot of these words. And there was an organization that I'm working with in the last couple of weeks. And I said, well, what are your values? And they were like excellence, respect, trust, integrity. And I said to him, what's the story? Like, where did these come from? And the person is a new leader. And she's like, I don't really know. And I said, they're kind of generic. And she's like, yeah, they are. They don't even have values, or not the values, but the behaviors articulating them. So they're completely open for interpretation of what that means for people as well. So that's something to just pay attention to. It's like, are your values things that are permission to play, or are they truly about the core of who you are, and that compass and integral system that guides you in terms of your deep, deep beliefs? I just wanted to show you, this is just, because it's Tech Alliance, I was like, well, here's a couple of examples of tech companies. But when you start to find the articulation of how values can actually start to really bring more insight to the uniqueness of a culture. So you'll see Apple, the way they articulate, bring great products to the planet, say no, value simplicity and avoid complexity. It's sort of like that's the values that they work from, and it informs the way they do business. Then you hold up them against IBM, very different culture, very different approach. Excellence as a way of life, obligation to stakeholders, and being a good corporate citizen. So, again, working there, you just even, when you look at those and you compare them, it's like, well, I think I'd rather go to this culture than this culture. So we as human beings align where we want to put our energy based on the values of a culture. So clear values are pivotal if you want to have a competitive advantage, if you want to have a compelling culture, if you want to attract people, you want to attract people that believe what you believe and see alignment in it.
Janet, I love the core values that you've shared for Apple and IBM, and I'm curious about an example that you might be able to provide when the culture shift happened and it truly transformed a company in meaningful, impactful, and measurable ways. Are you able to share something top of mind?
Can you say the question just a little differently? I'm not quite sure, like when the culture transformed, or when a situation?
As you begin to work with a company and they undertook some cultural shifts and some declarations of core values and determining things like tribal leadership levels, that you then saw a transformation in the company. It could be things like growing their revenue, attracting different talent, that going back to that sense of belonging. Are you able to share a little bit more detail on companies that you've worked with?
Yes. So the one that I mentioned before, the one that's the B Corp, and where they're going through the growth period, and again, going from that founder out to, all of a sudden, where the founder and the CEO really had his hands on everything. He had to develop a leadership team by clearly articulating the core values and the ways that that leadership team needed to function and hold culture together. This is where they are going through that growth piece, but they're doing it in a way where they can be consistent in, because they're growing, their workforce is growing, the tribe is getting bigger. So as they're onboarding new people, they're onboarding them with a very intentional perspective on, this is how we do things around here, which is one of the most simple ways. What is culture? Culture is, this is how we do things around here. This is what we believe. This is how we engage in our work. So they've been able to mobilize a group of people that have the spirit of that. They understand, the approach, and they're starting to go through a franchising model. So they're starting to, open up new different channels of how they're doing their work. And they're empowering more people. So the leaders and managers are now becoming the champions of culture. It used to be the CEO was the holder of all of that. He's still, I would say, like chief culture officer, if you want to think of it that way, but he's starting to spend more of his time in the visioning and the dreaming forward, the expansion, so that others can hold this, but they're doing it in a way where they have, they have very strong alignment. The one, and here's an example, Christina, because this is one of the ways it shows up too. In the pandemic, organizations that have had very clear cultures are the ones, and really where they work at this, they are the ones, in my experience, I've noticed them thriving. They're doing well, even in the face of so much disruption, so much challenge. Those are the ones where people, they are in that stage of culture. We are great. We can do it. We've got each other's backs. In the organizations where the culture has been shaky, where it's not something that's been a focal point, those are where I'm starting to see, it might be like a good stage 4 culture, but they start slipping into stage 3 behavior, even into stage 2. Because there's not enough holding of, kind of the health and well-being and the focus of the culture to keep people being really productive and collaborative towards those end goals. So those are just a couple of perspectives that I can offer on that.
And perhaps one more question. There was a curiosity with the Apple and the IBM examples. The question came in of, can you help to describe a little bit more about the saying no, and how that's part of a core value? Perhaps you have some insight, or you can describe what you think that means.
my understanding is they're super clear. It's sort of like, in terms of, it's like they will say no if it's not aligned with their design principles, the way they approach it, they're like where they see that they have, kind of like a unique ability to do things. If it goes counter to those things, they will just say no to it. So they'll say no to each other when they're innovating, but they're also like, from a market perspective, it's like, that's not our lane. We don't do that. So my understanding of Apple is they're like, we do things that are, because like a few things really well. We're not going to be this broad, massive organization and take on the world. But it's more the mindset is like, so it's the simplicity piece. I think they're all connected, but I think it's the discipline to say no and not follow like the shiny balls, squirrel. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Janet.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, okay, so I do want to underscore, if values are kind of the container that culture is built in, values need to be articulated with meaning. So values without behaviors are just words. Values, if they're just words on the wall and they have no meaning and no context around them, they are not part of a guidance system. So you do need to have common meaning around the behaviors that demonstrate how a value is lived. So if I did have the great joy of working in an organization which was actually very values centric, and it was St. Joseph's Healthcare, and the values were respect, excellence, and compassion. And those may sound kind of like permission to play. What I would say, though, is that there was such a deep articulation of the behaviors, the intention for why. When we say respect, from a St. Joseph's Healthcare organization, knowing that the roots of that organization were, it was founded by the Sisters of St. Joseph. So there's some deep meaning to what does it mean when we say respect and how we treat people? What does excellence mean here? And what does compassion mean? The one thing that was really interesting was when I was onboarded, anybody onboarded to that organization, there was extensive work done on those onboarding sessions around the story of the values, the history, the roots of them. So they were deep and core. And as a new member of that work community, you understood it. You were given the ability to understand where they came from and what they meant in the context of the organization. So it was with a real intention to align people, and the behaviors were crystal clear. So it is, these behaviors become the expectation of how people will engage in their work, in doing their work, and in how they relate to each other, whether it's them with colleagues, whether it's customers, partners, it doesn't matter. The behaviors is how we show up and what people can count on us for. Values without any, if you have them, but you don't hold people accountable to them, again, you won't have a strong culture. But when you have a culture where people are held to account, they have to own it, they have to live it and model it, that's where you're going to have a healthier, more vibrant and aligned culture. And again, please understand, people want to belong. People want to be part of a community. They take pride in advancing an organization which has meaning, and the values create meaning and connection. So understanding this is important. I do want to show you, this is an example of an organization because I wanted to highlight, it's not just the name, the value, but it's also how did they articulate the behaviors. So this is from Environics research. And this is an organization where we had the opportunity to do some work as they were really starting to do a reset of their culture and get clarity about their noble purpose, which is one of those attributes of a stage 4 culture, the clarity of their North Star, why we exist. And then as we did that, they identified their core values. It was a very creative process and it takes time. To do this work actually takes time. It's not just like, boom, there's a value, there's the behaviors, move on. And Christina, you might want to talk about that when I'm after this example, if you choose to, about the Tech Alliance journey. But what they came up with were 3 core values. And I will underscore too, it's like, if you have more than 3 values, you've got too many. I worked with one organization, they had 15 values. Nobody could remember them. So we went through a process where they refined them and they pulled them back. And they got to the core, and they ended up with 5 in that case, which was pretty good to go from 15 down to 5. But in this case, Environics was like, these are our core values. And you'll see they came up with a little acronym as well, the DNA. It's their core DNA. So discovery, if we didn't have any of those behaviors, you would make up your own meaning of discovery. What does discovery mean for me versus what does discovery mean for us? So they articulate, in this case, we engage with curiosity to achieve understanding. We experiment and try new ideas. We pursue the truth with rigor and open-mindedness. And again, these behaviors were articulated after lots of storytelling, lots of what is the practice we do? How do we go about our work? Like, they really got at the nuance of it. And again, navigation, we adapt to effectively deal with changing circumstances. We are confident to lead. We rise to challenges through creative exploration. So you'll see the words have energy, meaning, but they're also, these are behaviors that you can measure against. You could literally give feedback. Is somebody in navigation, are they being adaptable or are they being rather rigid? So you can give feedback and say, how can I help you, develop this ability to be more adaptable, to be more creative and generative as we're looking at in changing circumstances. So they become coachable elements, if you think of it like that. And then the final one, authentic relationships. Different people will, again, I find most people have some value about relationships, but how they articulate it, what they call it, just gets really interesting. So I'll just pause there. Christine, is there any additional questions or any comment you have around articulating values?
No, I don't necessarily see any additional questions right now, and certainly keeping an eye on the time. I appreciate you inviting me to chat a little bit about our journey. And for us, it was tough to get to 3 values, but we were at such a beautiful state in our organizational history that it was important for us to have some consensus for the folks who were part of the team at the time that we were developing our core values, to have that consensus, because it's not often that you get to be part of developing a set of core values. And often when you join an organization or a company, you adopt those core values, or you're selected through the recruitment process because there's some demonstration of that. For us, part of that journey was selecting the 3 and then writing the backstories. So our own personal value backstory, sharing that in triads with our team, and then having that description of, so in this case, the discovery, navigation, authentic relationships, having that word, but then it was the description. And as soon as the description writing had begun to happen, all of us could see ourselves in those core values, where we had those moments of like, oh, now I understand what you mean when you say that. That's the same for me, but I say it like this. And, as you know, we stayed a long time in the core value development, choosing our words very carefully and authentically. And we gave ourselves the time that was needed so that it felt right. And then, it's so much easier to be able to roll with the team and onboard new folks on the team when we're able to use the values that we have developed, and still getting used to it, and decision making and, time spent and prioritization. It's been a really terrific tool, at least for me, as I've conducted conversations, and I see it really coming to life in members of our team. So what a valuable exercise. Yeah.
Well, and so again, Christine's talking about the notion of what is the backstory. So when you have a fairly mature organization and very well-defined culture, when you receive new people into the organization, obviously you want to onboard them and introduce them to the values. But instead of just saying, this is what we believe, buy in, and let's move on, there's a part of the onboarding that would be very important to say, when you read these values, what resonates for you? If you think about a time in your life, so if discovery was a core value, then it's like, well, yeah, so what does that mean for me? And when I think about discovery and how I've lived that in my life and how I resonate with it, finding the story in my own life that I can bring into connection to the corporate culture. That is, I personally think that's a missing link, so it's sort of like, this is part of keeping the culture alive, is making sure that we're telling stories about the values. The values are present in every single day, how we communicate, how we make decisions, how we celebrate. So these are all things that are part of culture building work that's very, very important. They must be animated. So I wanted to spend just a couple minutes on who's responsible for culture. I do find that, culture work sometimes can be the orphan and the assignment of HR. And I think HR leaders and, people that work in that are, they have training and they have, amazing resources, but it can't be on the shoulders of one person or a small team. So if you truly want to have a vibrant, sustainable, active, intentional culture, the executive team needs to hold this as part of their shared responsibility. It needs to be a topic that is held and discussed and really focused on at that level. I've mentioned the notion of culture champions. So in addition to HR programs, leadership, and things to support and sustain the practices of culture, having culture champions. It could be working groups, it could be a group of people that are assigned for a period of time, that they can be the champions of the values and creating connecting opportunities, making sure there's that belonging and inclusion, celebrating the diversity. But culture champions is something that you could really create so that people see that it's not just leaders holding culture, it becomes the work of everybody. And really at the end of the day, each staff person has to take responsibility and ownership for the culture, to know that they are part of the contribution. I was with a team this morning and we were doing a reset, and we did a pulse check survey of how are they doing, what's going on, where are they feeling disconnected. And, one of the questions I said, for your team to thrive, what do you need? And then what intention, because they painted a picture together, but it's what intention do you have as a contributor to this team to make that happen? Because it's really easy if the culture is a bit wobbly, getting a little bit into that stage 2, life sucks. I'm a victim and I expect somebody else to make it better for me. You want to create an environment where your people feel that they're holders of culture. They're the creators of culture. So just think about that in terms of who is responsible. And again, I started off by saying everyone. Culture is everyone's business. The other thing that I wanted to mention to you is sometimes you do need to do a little bit of a reboot of your culture. And so sometimes, again, if you're going through change, if there's, a lot going on, sometimes you have to just do a pause and just do a little bit of where are we? Let's take a look at our culture and what does our culture need for it to be able to be vibrant and sustainable and to thrive. You need to sometimes look backwards, what got us here? What's been hard? When have we had some of the greatest success and what did it take for us to do that? Do storytelling. But you also need to create opportunities in terms of collective dreaming into the future. So what's the aspired culture? Where are we now? But what do we want the culture to be? And so let people be part of that conversation as well. I am a huge believer in the power of story sharing. When people tell stories, when they talk about a pride moments that they've had in the organization and other people get to hear it, and then you get to listen to other people, you start to be creating this mining of this is all the energy. It's the core of who we are, starts to come through. When you do these things, it also starts to boost empathy and understanding, where it's wow, I didn't realize you joined the company 20 years ago. I just joined last week. We're more similar than different. And I wouldn't have known that without hearing the stories and that we care about the same things. So these are all things that you can do to reset and bring everybody back to the core. And so a pause and a drop in and storytelling, connection, belonging, those are sometimes, if there's fertilizer for a culture, that's what I would say. I'm just going to show you, this is a story. This was done maybe 3 weeks ago, and there's a process that we run, which is called an epic tale. And it's a story sharing process, much like what I just mentioned. And we had people tell the story of the organization based on when they joined. So in this case, back in 1999, there was 20 people. And when we come up to the current day, there are now about 70 people. This organization has gone through many highs and lows. It's been merged, it's been demerged, it's been, different leaders along the way. They've had some amazing successes, but there's been a lot of organizational change. They've been through angst, fear, great results. And so they're now at the point where they wanted to tell the story so that everybody that is part of the senior leadership team could hear the story, contribute, and then say, where are we now? So it's a way of saying there's some stuff we need to let go of, but there's some good stuff. The luggage in this image is what's the good stuff that we want to carry forward with us? And only until you do that process can you actually create conditions for people to really then dream. So then we were able to do some, getting people to be in the same place with each other, having heard each other's stories and honored the stories, to then paint the picture of what is this aspirational future we have for our culture. So that's where I'm going to end, because I just think that it's the process of getting there. It takes so much tending, and people have so much amazing ability in themselves, but we need to create spaces for people to stop and pause and actually connect with each other and connect with the culture if we want to lift it and shape it and help it grow. So Christina, that's it, all in the planned remarks. So if there's any questions.
Well, I think that our time together has been simply incredible. There's been a journey over the course of the hour and 10 minutes that we've been together. I love many of the concepts of the culture being the long game, and talking about triads and actual tactical ways of having conversations, and being able to do the look back and the backstory with things like the epic tale, and bringing people together and having that authentic experience to understand where we are and where we're going, and holding that space and really demonstrating that everybody is responsible for that company culture, and every one of us can contribute. And so holding space for one another and finding ways to journey back to it, having a reset or a reboot, are all really tactical outcomes that folks on this call could take back to their own workplaces. So I want to offer my incredible thanks to you for joining us today. Had a lively audience, great questions, lots of chatter. It really was quite meaningful. So Jen, thank you to you. And for those of you who have joined us today, we hope that you're well. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks so much, Janet.
Thank you.